Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Tech Showdown. My name is Kevin, and today we're going to be looking at, we're doing a CPU showdown of the Pentium G3258 against my personal i7-4770k. Now, on the surface, this may seem insane to put these two up against each other, but they are going to be overclocked, both to 4.4 gigahertz, and I'll speak a bit about that later. But first, most of you are probably familiar with the i7-4770k, so I probably don't need to go into much detail about that. It's been out for a while now. It's just a 22nm Haswell processor with a whole lot of features like most i7s. If you've just watched videos about the 4790k Devil's Canyon, which sort of kind of replaced it, it's essentially the same thing, except the 4790k has a few sort of upgrades in it, like the thermal interface material and extra capacitors and that sort of thing. But it's essentially the same thing as a 4790k. However, this little Pentium, which we'll call the Pentium K because it's easier than saying G3258 all the time, is the 20th year that the Pentiums have been coming out, 20th anniversary, which is just crazy. And I remember when I was a kid and I'd be playing, all the older games with friends of mine and stuff, and they'd say when, your parents would go out to buy you a new computer or whatever, or buy the family a new computer. I remember my friends saying, "Oh, make sure your parents get a computer with a Pentium in it, because that's the best for playing games and stuff and all that." So it's just crazy to think they're still going. And so I was really happy to give this one a whirl. So it's LGA 1150, the same as 4770k, and a lot of the Haswell processors are LGA 1150. It will work in a Z87 motherboard, but it's primarily made for Z97. It'll drop straight into a Z97, no problem. On a Z87, you'll probably need to do a BIOS update. I have an Asus Maximus 6 Hero motherboard, Z87, and I had to get a BIOS update from Asus's website. However, I did it through the AI suite, and it didn't actually work. So for some bizarre reason, if you're an Asus motherboard, use Asus utilities and then it'll actually work. Because I did the BIOS update, it said it was on the newest BIOS, I dropped it in and nothing happened, so I was like, this is weird, and then I did it through utilities and then it worked just fine. So keep that in mind. So this little guy is 22nm as well. It's Haswell. It's basically a 2-core Haswell, a dual-core Haswell, bare bones without all the features. So it doesn't have hyper-threading like the 4770k does. It doesn't have VTD or TSX or vPro. It does have QuickSync, which is cool. It has a smaller cache as well, and it's only 53 watt TDP compared to the 84 watt TDP of the 4770k. Now, I did overclock both of these to 4.4 gigahertz, so I can see them against each other. And I'm not just going to focus on gaming, we're going to do productivity stuff as well. Now, these were cooled by my H110, Corsair H110 liquid cooler. That's a 280 millimeter, liquid cooler, and I have Noctua NF-A14 fans on it, so replace the crappy stock H110 fans with proper pressure optimized fans. So into the benchmarks. Now, just before we go into it, what's going to be interesting is that a lot of things these days, since the 4770k is obviously quad core with hyper-threading, so it's kind of like an 8-core, kind of take that with a grain of salt. It's not an actual 8-core, but it's kind of like it. Where this is only dual core. Now, what's the big deal with that is that if these are running at the exact same frequency, 4.4 gigahertz, is that actually going to transfer into, is the 4770k actually going to be able to utilize all those extra cores, essentially, and knock this out, or will this just do just fine? And that's what a lot of people talk about, and this debate rages on between the i5 and the i7 ranges. People with i5 4670Ks would say, you know, that there's no reason to get a 4770k for gaming because you see no benefits. And that's what's going to be really interesting about it. But without further ado, into it we go. So, first up was in the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, the benchmark in there. So I did the 4770k first, and that scored 1,093 marks. Then I chucked the Pentium K in it. Remember, these are both running at 4.4 gigahertz, and that scored 324 marks. So that's a low score for it, but the benchmark does utilize the extra cores, so that was kind of to be expected. Now into Unigine Valley. This is on the Extreme HD preset. I'm running my reference R9 in the system for both tests, and the memory has been clocked. My ADATA memory has been clocked the exact same for both. Both running at 2400 megahertz. Now, Unigine Valley Extreme HD, the 4770K scored 56.8 frames per second, and the Pentium K scored 56.6 frames per second. So there's pretty much nothing in it. Now into Unigine Heaven. This is 4.0, DirectX 11, everything maxed out. The i7-4770k scored 53.3 frames per second average. The Pentium K, or Pentium G3258, scored 50.3 frames per second, so exactly the same. Wow. Now, Tomb Raider. This is 1080p, everything maxed out without VSync. The i7-4770k, 73.3 frames per second. The Pentium K, 73.8 frames per second. So that was a bit strange. Probably just within the margin of error though. Now, Bioshock Infinite is the last game we're going to do. This is in user settings 2, so everything maxed out, DirectX 11, 1080p. The i7-4770k scored 89.4 frames per second average. The Pentium K scored 88.7 frames per second average. Now the last thing, video rendering. So I picked a video clip for my Playtech TV channel, the Playtech TV channel, and it's a 1080p 24 frames per second video. It's a minute and 35 seconds long, and I rendered this just at 1080p 24 frames, and I took the time that it took to render. The 4770k rendered it in 2 minutes 9 seconds. The Pentium K took 4 minutes 42 seconds. So yeah, so from the benchmarks we can already tell that this thing kicks absolute ass in gaming, but it sucks for productivity stuff, and that's to be expected. So, you know, that I mean, it's only a dual core, so that is to be expected. But the, you know, single-threaded performance is ridiculous, and it's just as good as a 4770k. And we'll get to why a few other things later, and why you might be able to see this price tag here is so important when considering the Pentium K. Now into temperatures. So I ran the Intel CPU stress test in Intel Extreme Tuning Utility. That's for 15 minutes, and I took the highest temperature. Now, these aren't running at the same voltages, so my 4770K would sit at 4.4 gigahertz, no worries, at 1.28 volts. The Pentium K, on the other hand, required a little bit more, 1.32 volts. Now, I'm not that good at overclocking, so, and obviously different CPUs are, you know, some are better than others, but that's what it worked for me. Regardless, the i7-4770K went up to 79 degrees Celsius, so it's getting a little bit toasty. Remember their thermal limit. These Haswells, I don't actually know what the thermal limit is. In my experience, though, they get to about 100 degrees Celsius, and then they'll start throttling. They don't usually throttle before then. I've had mine up around 96 degrees and it still wasn't throttling, so yeah. So 79 degrees Celsius for the 4770K. The Pentium K only went to 67 degrees Celsius. So less cores and less heat, even with more voltage. It's just going to run a lot cooler. So that was pretty impressive. What's even more impressive is that some of the guys at Playtech have been overclocking these up to some ridiculously high frequencies, guys that are way more pro than me, on the stock cooler. So just think about that. On the stock cooler that comes with it, the shitty little Intel cooler in here. Well, it's not shitty. It does the job it needs to, but it's shitty for overclocking. That is. Well, that's what I thought. But anyways, they've been cranking these things up on the stock cooler, and it hasn't been hitting its thermal limit. So if you can do it on the stock cooler, then, you know, you'll be able to go much further with even a basic aftermarket cooler, like a Hyper 212 or something like that. So, in conclusion, what do I think of these? Well, I did overclock this to see how high it would go. Now, my 4770K isn't that good of an overclocker. It only goes... It goes to 4.6 and then it gets a little bit grumpy after that. So I usually just set it to 4.4 as kind of like a safe place to be. This little sucker though went all the way to 4.9. I tried 5 gigahertz and I played around with the voltages, heats, and it just wasn't having it. And I turned my memory down to other things, but just didn't want to go there. But it would run at 4.9 gigahertz just fine, which is pretty incredible since the base clock is 3.2. So that's more than like a 50% overclock, which is just insane. Yeah, phenomenal. So, who would I recommend the Pentium K to, or Pentium G3258, which is its proper name? Well, if you're not doing any productivity things, so you're not going to be using video editing or hardcore picture editing in Photoshop or anything else that's productivity-based stuff that does require a lot of cores. So you're just looking for a great gaming CPU, then get this. And please overclock it. It's not that good at its standard base frequency. It's a little bit on the low side. But overclock it. You don't even need an aftermarket cooler. Ideally, you will. But if you can't afford to have that and something else, then just... yeah, use the stock one. This thing is just insane that it can, a $100, this is $100, right, at Playtech. A 4790K is $500, which is essentially the same thing. It's a 4770K, basically, with upgraded things, as I said before, and it just runs at 4.4 gigahertz from standard. So, if we put these two against each other, there'd be no difference. There'd be temperature differences and a few other things. But in benchmarks, and I did bench this one already, it's exactly the same as a 4770K. Why? If you're only gaming, why would you get this? Get this. Gaming only, this will go as fast as this. There's no difference. Productivity stuff, throw this one away. Whoa, and my chair just fell over. Yeah, the Pentium is just no good. It'll take you more than twice as long to render things. And it's not designed for that. It's only a dual core. It doesn't have hyperthreading. It just isn't designed for it. But it is incredibly fast. So what I would say, instead of spending $500 on an i7 or whatever, or even an i5, honestly, let's be real. There's no reason if you're just going to get this, if you're not doing productivity stuff. You could get this, a aftermarket cooler, say a Hyper 212, or maybe one of the lower-end Noctua ones, if you want something like that, which still perform really good, and a damn good motherboard for less than what you pay for a 4770K or 4790K. And there's going to be no difference in the benchmark. So go out, if you're looking for a new CPU and you're not doing productivity stuff, you're just solely gaming, and that's all you're going to be doing, then get this. Now, a disclaimer. I am aware that more games are going to be developed and they'll be utilizing more cores down the road. But for right now, and a lot of the games I play, and most of what you guys probably play, will only rely on single-threaded performance, which is what this is ideal at. Down the road, that may change. But people were saying that when the next-gen consoles came out, because they were running 8 cores. And they would say, well, all the games after the next-gen consoles come out will be utilizing all cores, and we just haven't seen that. So I still think that's something that will happen, but for right now, pick up one of these, and that's going to end our first CPU showdown. So let me know what you think. Obviously, this is my first time doing it, so I might need to refine a few things. I hope you like it. I hope you're impressed with this little Pentium, because I certainly was, and it's fantastic. And I'll see you guys next time on Tech Showdown.